All right, everybody. This is going to be your assignment today. It's a little flipped learning. We're going to be doing just copying down the notes from the Civil Rights Unit. I already kind of explained this already in class, kind of the expectation and why we're doing this. Um, so you'll need the guided notes. Fill this in. You will have a quiz on this. So um, again, if you have any questions, please let me know. All right. So obviously, we're going to be starting our Civil Rights Unit. Um, this is all part of the Cold War concept, right? You have, I told you guys a couple weeks ago how we're going to teach 40s, 50s, 60s, take a time out. We already did that with Cold War. Now we're going to go to civil rights because I want you guys to really understand like kind of what this era was like and how you had so much going on. You had Cold War, you had nuclear arms race, you had space race, you had Vietnam, which we'll get to in our next unit, civil rights, all kinds of things going on both abroad in foreign countries as well as here at home with a lot of different types of concerns and things that were going on. So, kind of what you guys do need. There we go. All right. So, civil rights. What does that basically? What does that mean? What are we referring to when we say civil rights? So basically, it's basic rights that everyone is entitled to. So if you think back to John Locke, life, liberty, property. Um, all those things are things that we've been talking about all year. Enlightenment ideas, Enlightenment concepts, not just for some people, not for a select group, but for everybody. So each person should have life, liberty, property. Every person should have equal opportunity and treatment. Um, with getting jobs and owning property where they want. This is something that obviously, as you guys already know, and as we'll learn about, there were people in our country that didn't have those opportunities in terms of jobs, in terms of housing, in terms of basic services. So that's something as a country that we need to address. And this has been a problem for a very long time in our country, but it won't be until like after World War II where we start seeing it a lot more. All right, so a big thing, a big reason for why prejudice exists is because of stereotypes. So what is a stereotype? A stereotype is a thought. So you don't really, you're placing people into a category without really getting a chance to know them. You're assuming that everybody fits into a certain category. So like, okay, so for instance, like we all have stereotypes. So think about like teenagers. I think we already had this conversation a couple weeks ago. Like teenagers have stereotypes. Maybe being lazy, maybe is being spoiled, maybe being entitled, maybe not really willing to work, maybe attached to their phone. Now, obviously, not all kids are that way. I know a lot of you guys who are very respectful, who work really hard, who probably work a lot of hours, who are balancing work, sports, school, who are respectful. So obviously, that would be unfair for somebody to say all teenagers are this, because obviously, as we know, it's not always the case. Teachers, same thing. Teachers have stereotypes. Maybe again, you guys can think in your head. I know I've had this conversation in the past with kids, but you know, teachers being strict, being mean, having no life. Like all we do is sit home and grade. And how can we make the kids' lives miserable? Those are all things that go into stereotypes. Now, obviously, not all teachers are that way. Some are laid back, some are funny like me. Parents, elderly, white collar workers, factory workers. Again, there's all different types of stereotypes. So again, it's unfair to clump people all into a category. All right, so prejudice. So basically, a prejudice is basically when it's a feeling that you have, a feeling that you form, opinions that you form, judgments that you form based upon your stereotypes. So you don't like teachers because of whatever your feeling or an opinion is of a couple that may have wronged you. So you might be prejudiced towards teachers because of that. You might be wary of teachers. Might lump people into a category. We all have these things. Let's say, you walk down the street and you see somebody coming down with an arm sleeve of tattoos and piercings all over the place. You might have certain preconceived notions about that person. Again, if you ever think of the old quote, "Never judge a book by its cover." Okay, so it's again a prime example of how you should never really, judge somebody based upon a preconceived judgment. Now, this is where your thought. So a prejudice is a feeling, okay, a feeling that you have internally. Now, discrimination is when it's your action. You're acting upon your judgments. You're actually not treating somebody fairly because of your stereotypes. So maybe you're not hiring somebody. If you're ever in charge of a company, and you don't hire somebody based upon your prejudices, um, that would be a prime example. Maybe you guys are prejudiced towards blondes, and you're like, well, I'm not going to hire blondes. Well, that's discrimination. Or you're not going to hire women for a certain reason. You're not going to hire a certain group of people for a certain reason. Not going to hire elderly for a certain reason. Again, that would be discrimination. You're providing that person unequal treatment. Okay, so there we go. All right, so again, I think we already covered this. Um, um, I know we already covered this case a long time ago, but just to kind of review, Plessy versus Ferguson is a historic court case. Again, this is something you guys got to know. I'm not a big court case guy. I'm not going to ask you guys to know a whole lot of court cases. I think there's maybe two or three you kind of just have to just know. So Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896. This is a historic court case because this is what's going to allow Jim Crow laws to exist down south. This court case is going to say it's okay to separate based upon race. So it all started with Plessy in Louisiana. He's going to sit on the white section of a train because that was Louisiana law. He had to separate based upon races. He is purposefully going to sit in the white section, knowing he can't because he knows he's going to get in trouble. He knows he's going to get arrested. The reason why he's doing this is to kind of sacrifice himself. He's going to challenge this law as being unfair. But ultimately, this will go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will rule that Louisiana's law of segregation is legal. It is constitutional as long as the facilities are equal. So you guys see here, restrooms, white and black. Again, you're separating races. Drinking fountains, separating. Schools, separated. Restaurants, different sections of restaurants, separated. So this is what's going to allow in the United States for the next 60 years the legalized segregation of individuals that will lead to discriminatory practices within the United States. So again, you need to know this buzzword, highlight it in your notes. Okay, so how exactly were African Americans discriminated against, again, from 1865 through the Civil Rights Movement in the 60s? All right, so I'll show you some pictures here in a minute, but you will see some cases of them being physically attacked by groups, by vigilante groups, whether it's the KKK. You also see examples of police officers and law enforcement have always, they've had examples of clashes. We'll talk about, throughout this unit, the March on Selma. I'll show you guys some pictures of some of these practices as well. So we'll discuss that. The next major thing is laws. There were laws that were taken away for voting rights. Again, voting is a modes for change, to have your voices be heard, to change different aspects of society that you don't agree with. So there were southern states that were taking voting rights away from African Americans. Again, I think we already talked about this during our 20s unit, but different ways they would do this is by having poll taxes, basically making you pay a tax in order to vote. Okay, so let's think about this. If you are somebody who is you can't get certain jobs because of the color of your skin or your gender. So you can only get low-paying jobs, making you forced to live in poverty. You can only live in certain sections of the city. If you're already living in poverty, you're probably not going to be able to pay to vote. So again, this was one practice that was done in some states that limited people's rights to vote. And you have literacy tests. Reading and writing, again, same thing. If you're somebody who didn't have an education and never learned how to read or write, if a requirement is you need to read or write in order to vote, and you never were formally taught, again, that's going to limit your ability as well. And I think during the 20s, and I think I gave you guys a sample literacy test. They would give the African Americans the harder test that would, again, prohibit them from voting. And then this was a more of extreme measure. Grandfather clause basically meant that if your grandfather couldn't vote, cause, back in like the slavery days, then you couldn't vote as well. So they called that grandfather clause. Again, guys, you need to know these terms. This will be on your guys. This is something that is a standard that is heavily emphasized state release test questions, poll taxes, literacy tests. Again, this was a means to prevent African Americans from voting. As I said before, discriminated against from receiving a job and housing. So remember in our last unit, we talked about white flight. We talked about how during the 1950s, suburbs, people moving from cities to suburbs. Well, in a lot of cases, you have a lot of white people leaving the cities, going out to the suburbs. And there were some housing practices, especially in these suburbs, where they wouldn't sell homes to African Americans. Again, neighborhoods were segregated. So again, there were some measures that prevented, whether it was through, and these also weren't always laws. It was just kind of just a thing that people didn't sell their homes to African American families. So, and then as I said before, jobs. Sometimes, African Americans weren't getting higher paying jobs, weren't getting promotions based upon the color of their skin. Then last, as I said before, Jim Crow laws. These were segregation laws in the South, separated schools, restaurants, military, buses, bathrooms. Okay, so you guys see an example of this in this photo. This is a famous photo of the Woolworth counter in North Carolina at the Woolworth restaurant. So you see, obviously, you see white and you see African American students that are sitting at the front lunch counter, which was prohibited. African Americans could not sit at the front of the front counter. So obviously you have white students as well who is joining to bring attention to this issue, and you see the group of people who form behind them, who are dumping things on their head. You see this African American girl, this white student here, other white student here who has their clothes are full of pop, different types of condiments, and they're being bullied because they're trying to bring attention and trying to bring change to this community that their practices of segregation is unfair. But again, keep this in mind. MLK, peaceful protests. He did not believe in violence. So again, think about why. Think about what this photo represents. Like, who looks bad in this photo? The students that are protesting, or the people behind them? I'm hoping you're saying the people behind them. They look like the bullies. So that's really the whole point of the movement of what MLK was trying to do. Then you see cases like this. Down south with different protest movements. You see, again, this is something that's not a relatively new thing with police and and its community members. This is something that's been going on for a long time. This isn't just a 2023 problem. This is something that's that's been going back for years upon years upon years. We see this dog biting what looks like to be, again, I don't know the full story, but you see this African American protester here, or a person, I don't know if he was actually part of the protest, but I assume he was, who is just standing there, and then you have the dog biting onto the stomach. So again, you see pictures like this that are fluctuating throughout the South and throughout the North, and you start seeing some of these issues kind of come to light. And you see this example down here, the same thing. Again, we don't know the full story, the full scope of what happened, but again, another example here that showed some of the contentious moments between the police and community, using fire hoses on protesters. Again, a lot of these were during MLK's marches, during the speeches. Again, using bullying tactics to try and disperse them to stop the protests. Again, another example here. So I can go on. Now, last but not least, is the NAACP. This is a group of people. This is an organization. They're still around today. It's called the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Very powerful organization today. Very powerful, very influential. And basically, what they do is that they help use their power, their money, to bring awareness to injustices across the United States with hiring practices and different types of laws. Essentially, they're there to help minorities. So essentially, they bring awareness, but they also bring lawsuits. They challenge court cases. So like Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks was a secretary for the NAACP. Remember Rosa Parks sitting on the bus? So we'll talk more about that next week. But this is, again, a very powerful civil rights organization that's going to challenge a lot of these Jim Crow laws and a lot of these laws within the South. Okay, so that's all I got for you. So again, make sure you have this all copied down in your guided notes. and I'll see you next week.